Okay, so there may not be a physical release for the game according to Nintendo on their website, but maybe Amazon might have leaked a listing for it on theirs. Let me check. Shit, no, they don't have a page for it. I checked eBay. Okay, how about on PlayAsia? Aha! Right here. And it says it's only in Japan. Fuck. Why is it that the gaming industry has been selective with these physical releases in recent years? I mean, all I'm looking for is a physical copy of the game that I want to have as opposed to downloading it onto my console and wasting more space that could be used for saves and games that deserve to be released digitally. It seems that in the last couple of years there's been a push towards making media more digitally available than physically, from the rise of streaming services replacing old school networks and cable television, to the inevitable end of DVD and Blu-ray formats for most movies moving to the already mentioned streaming services and digital copies. It seems that the digital revolution is coming quicker and quicker with each passing year. Now that's not to say I'm behind the times. I mean, okay, I still have a VCR in the year 2022. Fuck off. But I still want to have something that I can hold on to and look at. With that said, let's talk about the video game industry and the battle they're facing over whether or not to fully abandon physical releases, as that's been somewhat of a debate for the last 10 to 15 years. Not to really derail the subject, but to understand the debacle over digital, we have to go over a brief history of online gaming distribution, as these lesser known and sometimes region-restricted services played a small role in getting us to where we are today. Many think that online gaming distribution began in the early to mid-2000s with consoles like the Xbox, with Nintendo and Sony jumping into the scene with the Wii and PS3 a few years later, but these services were being offered around 40 years ago with the Atari and the Intellivision. Yeah, in a strange set of events, the 2600 and the Intellivision are technically the first consoles to offer an online gaming service, with Ataris being offered by a third-party company called Control Video Corporation, or CVC, in 1983 with the Game line. The service was pretty simple. Through a subscription service, customers would receive a special cartridge that would go into the Atari with a built-in modem. By attaching a phone line to the cartridge, the customer could pay to rent games over an early internet for a grand total of $75 the first month, and $15 each additional month. And let me add that this does not include the additional $1 per game cost and the fact that you can only keep the game for a week, with the option to continue to rent the game for an additional $1 each day. Meanwhile, the Intellivision's online service, dubbed Play Cable, was being released in a limited test market a year or two prior, but was set for a full-on nationwide release in 1982-1983. Intellivision services would use the same methods of distribution as Atari's, but would not charge the customer for individual games, but would alter the game library at the start of every month. Yeah, early downloadable games were pretty costly and took forever to receive. These services would quickly be discontinued due to the North American video game crash of 1983, however. We wouldn't see another online service like that in North America until the Sega Channel for the Sega Genesis in 1994. Meanwhile, in Japan, the video game industry was kicking off into full gear with the release of the Nintendo Famicom in 1983, but by the mid-1980s, Japan was dealing with issues over the rising cost of component chips that were being manufactured for electronics. These rising costs were worrisome to a company like Nintendo, who months prior had just started their test marketing of the Famicom, now called the Nintendo Entertainment System, in North America, and were dealing with the cost of handling that endeavor. To combat the component chip cost, Nintendo would release a new format peripheral for the Famicom, dubbed the Famicom Disk System in 1986. Utilizing floppy diskettes instead of traditional game cartridges, Nintendo was able to sell their new releases for a cheaper price, as well as take advantage of the higher capacity of the diskettes with larger games like The Legend of Zelda, Metroid, and Kid Icarus. Another thing that Nintendo took advantage of was the opportunity of having their customers go into any store and basically download a new game onto their rewritable diskettes. The Famicom Disk System kiosk would be established in various convenience stores all throughout Japan a few months following the release of the console. These kiosks would allow customers to download new games on their diskettes for a low price of $3 or 300 yen, with an additional option to get the manual for the game for an additional $1 or 100 yen, or a new game written on a new diskette with a manual for an overall total of $16 or 2,922 yen. By the late 1980s, chip prices started to fall back to stable levels, and thus Nintendo started to phase itself out of the Famicom Disk System era of the Famicom, with Nintendo's final Disk System game coming out in 1992. But this wasn't the last online service Nintendo would offer, as in the next console they would release the Satellaview for the Super Famicom in 1995. With a subscription price of $115 or 14,000 yen the first month and a recurring fee after, this service would allow for the customer to tune into games that would be broadcast for a while on a daily schedule. For an additional $30 or 2,645 yen, you could get a special cartridge to record and keep the broadcast to play again during the off hours. Around the same time, Nintendo offered a new retail download service for the Super Famicom with the Nintendo Power cartridges. For a cost of $45 or 3,980 yen, customers could purchase a RAM cartridge and download a total of 1 to 7 games, depending on their size. In 2000, Nintendo would release a companion service to serve the Game Boy for $28 or 2,500 yen. These services would eventually be discontinued in 2007. At that point, Nintendo would release the Wii Shop channel, and the Xbox would have the Xbox Game Store, and the PS3 would also have the PlayStation Store. So, the rest was pretty much history. So now that we got all that history out of the way, let me tell you why I feel companies like Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft are slowly but surely pushing for a more digital storefront, as opposed to physical copies in retail stores in the last couple of years. Because, at least to me, it feels like this has been going on for a while, hasn't it? Yeah, in the last couple of years, there seems to have been a slowdown of more physical releases of games. In the most part, third-party games, but still games nonetheless. Companies that produce games for the big three, like Sega, Bandai Namco, and especially WayForward, have been releasing more of their games on the digital storefronts as opposed to doing physical copies. Hell, in WayForward's case, they've been having another company take care of their physical copies, Limited Run Games. Trust me, I have a few things to say about them later. But the point I'm trying to make is that the digital storefront for these systems are starting to have a wider variety of games on their platforms as opposed to walking into a store to find a copy through a glass case or sitting on a shelf. Now, I can understand the reason for not wanting to do a physical release for all of the games that would get put up on the digital storefronts, because if it did happen, many of these shops would be piled up with copies for a magnitude of games, and they would absolutely find it difficult to sell through their orders for much lesser known or bottom-of-the-barrel games that would, on average in a digital storefront, get under 10,000 purchases in its lifetime. But I feel like there needs to be a greater balance in both physical and digital storefronts on how they should tackle game releases going forward. As a surprise to all of these companies, there are still people that want to hold the physical copy. I think there should be some consideration taken right now that what I'm suggesting will possibly never ever get done, and that these are some mere ideas and opinions on how things are running and how they should be mitigated in the future. Because trust me, there are some sound notions I believe should be brought up. First, major first-party titles should receive both a physical and digital release worldwide. This is a no-brainer, and while yes, there has to be some acknowledgement that not all first-party titles are meant to be large-scale releases, the option for a physical release should still be there nonetheless. Second, don't do a physical and digital release for one region, then do a completely digital only for another. It just makes people want to go out and import the physical game as opposed to downloading the digital copy. The big example I can use for this is Famicom Detective Club, the 2021 remakes that were released for the Nintendo Switch. In the US, it was given a digital-only release. Well, at the time I'm writing this, who knows? Nintendo might pull a Hades and suddenly give it a physical release months later. But in Japan, this is the Famicom Detective Club Collector's Edition box set, the only physical release of this game. Seriously, what the fuck, Nintendo? It's funny because you know Nintendo had the time and resources to look at the Japanese box set, translate the books and the cases into English, and possibly make some alterations regarding the collectible posters, and bam! They could have released this in the US as a retail release, hell, even as a possible limited time release. Speaking of which...
Third, if you're going to release something digitally, don't make it a limited time digital release, it just makes your company look more greedy. Super Mario's 35th anniversary, anyone?
Yeah, remember when Nintendo announced all of these big Mario games in 2020 for their 35th anniversary? And you also remember when they decided to drop the ball on all of us and announced that all these games would be dropped digitally from the eShop on March 31st, 2021? How pissed off were you then when you realized you could not play Super Mario 35 the day after the 31st?
Well, now all I have is an icon for Super Mario 35, but no game that icon can lead me to. Thanks, Nintendo.
This actually leads into a larger argument that digital releases have caused in the last 15 years, when a game gets pulled from a storefront. Now easily you could be saying, who cares, I download the game, so all of its files are on my storage or external storage device. But what happens if you run out of space in either place of storage or decide to delete the game to make room for a new one? Then let's say that you end up getting a larger storage capacity external device, like an external hard drive or a larger micro SD card, and decide that you may want to re-download the game that you deleted. You come to find out that the storefront you bought the game on has dropped the game from its store and no longer has the backup files from your previous purchase to re-download their game.
In the case of Nintendo, just deciding after a decade of operation to close down their shops for their former consoles, the Wii U and 3DS, without giving their consumers an alternate option to purchase these games, thus leading to more piracy, which Nintendo hates and deals with through DMCA notices, but yet they don't truly solve the problem by just allowing these games to be available on their recent console storefronts for digital purchase, because to them that's too much work, and it could just be simpler to slowly drip out the content on their Nintendo online services to get their customers to pay for that monthly or yearly fee, instead of the one purchase and done model of the previous generations. Holy fuck, I need a drink. Can you tell I'm a Nintendo fan? Now, let's talk about limited run games and companies similar to them.
I should immediately state that I have nothing against limited run or any similar companies that do limited physical releases, but I do have a few issues with how they handle their release model. I get it, limited means limited, nothing can last forever, and the company can only afford to or agree to produce only a certain number of games. But the way they decide to announce and release their stock does make me just a little disappointed. Not because I can't get a copy of a certain game, but because limiting certain releases to online only or a select number of retail shops like Best Buy leads to a huge surge in online bot buyers picking them up within the first 10 minutes, and then going out of their way to immediately put up listings of their orders to sites like eBay or Amazon.
Two games that have been the biggest pains to look for because of this method are the Shantae series and River City Girls, both produced by WayForward and both released by Limited Run. In terms of Shantae, these games were recently re-released on the Nintendo Switch starting in 2017, with a port of Half Genie Hero, which was surprisingly given a wide release, mainly because WayForward used a different distributor at the time, XC Games.
However, the previous three games will be re-released through Limited Run.
And with that, any chances of getting any physical copies of Shantae, Shantae Risky's Revenge, or even Shantae and the Pirate's Curse were little to none, with no mentions of retail release for places like Best Buy at first.
Yeah, I should acknowledge that during the writing of this episode, WayForward and a new company that I get to mention, Fangamer.com, announced and released a special limited edition digital copy of Shantae and the Seven Sirens for all home consoles, with the bonus being the chance to get your hands on this adorable collectible plushie of Shantae.
I'll stick to my Peach plushie, thank you very much.
And I cannot say the same thing, however, for the original Shantae trilogy or River City Girls. I mean, come on, Limited Run, at least send a few of the shops a fraction of that inventory. I mean, it would have been awesome to walk into a shop like Pastime Legends, Vortex Games, J Street Games, or even Chaotic Games, and find some copies of the games at their original retail prices, instead of walking in and finding some used copies of the game going for twice or three times the original price.
To me, the best way to solve this is for a company like Limited Run to take however many copies of the game that they produce and split it into cuts for various outlets of distribution. A section for GameStop, a section for the local game shops, a section for larger retailers like Best Buy, Target, or Walmart, and finally a section for the online sector.
Because if Limited Run keeps sticking with this routine, people may be tempted to just order an imported copy of the game from another part of the world like Japan or Korea through sites like PlayAsia or eBay.
In the end, I do feel that while many are ready to move on to the digital age of game distribution, there are still some like myself that are not fully prepared. But with that said, I also don't believe that every game needs a physical release. Games that are hard to come by, original release copies of, like the original Shantae, and games that are difficult to retain in terms of their original forms, like the mobile games from G-Mode series, should be given and, for maybe a better case of preservation, kept to a digital-only format, with the only options for a limited physical release, given that the physical release can be properly balanced out between the online sector and the physical retailer. On the other hand, major first and third party games should be kept to a hybrid physical-digital release in all regions. Thus, Nintendo, a game like Famicom Detective Club, should have had a hybrid release, or at least a release more in line with a game like Super Mario 3D All-Stars. And while yes, I will admit that there are some short sights regarding physical media, like the ease of loss and the never-ending issues regarding mail theft when it comes to deliveries from companies like UPS, USPS, and especially FedEx, it still doesn't compare to the issues of digital, especially crash games and remove listings and files. And while physical must also deal with the issues regarding digital patches and updates not being able to save onto the cartridge itself, this could be easily mitigated through replacement copies and limited time re-releases. On an environmental level, I should also add that it would be more environmentally safe to produce physical media as opposed to digital, more in the sense that physical media cases, cartridges, and discs can be easily recyclable, as opposed to keeping a digital game on a server that has to suck up more power, thus using more environmental resources. Yeah, the only reason I brought this section up was more or less because of the argument brought upon us by cryptocurrency and NFTs. Thanks a lot. I feel like I shot myself in the foot for bringing those things up, but it doesn't change my mind on the idea of having a physical copy as opposed to a digital one. Plus, at least it's better than putting an unencrypted URL link on a cheap-ass RFID card with an RFID unprotected cardboard case that anyone can steal from a retail store. Then claiming they're NFTs? I mean, god damn it, Tommy, that's moronic.
Cockle of a